Today is Christ the King Sunday, which is the last Sunday in the church's calendar, right? So next Sunday, we start telling the Jesus story all over again as we enter into the season of Advent. That's right. But today, we're wrapping things up, and we are considering the implications of how it is that Jesus became Christ the King. The king over all of the other kings, the sovereign over all of creation. And we're going to be looking at this from the perspective of the prophet Jeremiah this morning. Jeremiah was a member of a priestly family. He lived 600, 700, somewhere in there, years before Jesus. He was a prophet or a spokesman for God in Judah, which is the southern kingdom. You remember that Israel got divided up, and the north became known as Israel, and the southern two tribes became known as Judah, and the north fell apart before the southern part, and then eventually the southern part was about to be hauled off to exile in Babylon. They were about to enter into the Babylonian exile. And during Jeremiah's time, the writing was on the wall, and it was clear that this was all going to happen, that there was going to be a drastic change very, very, very soon. Because the kings had become irresponsible and they had become oppressive, the kingdom was going to be yanked from the grasp of the royal and power class. And as the prophets, including Jeremiah, saw things, it was all the fault of the leaders and their abusive approach to leadership. There was this dark, oppressive cloud hanging over the entire people, and Jeremiah did not at all hesitate to point out how dismal the situation was. Yet he didn't get stuck there. He was also a prophet of hope. He condemned the abuses and then offered a message of hope for a new day. God is going to fix things. God is going to bring in some new leaders. Leaders which operate according to God's standards. So in a sense, Jeremiah 23, 1 through 6 gives us a unique glimpse into the mind of God as He is thinking about the nature of that leadership. And it begins to beg the question of us, what does it take to lead? What does it take to lead? What does it mean to be a leader? What are the characteristics of a leader? Now in the ancient world, the ordinary people had very little say about who was going to lead them. You did not have an election to choose your king. You just accepted the king that was put over you. But in our system, we all have at least a little bit to say about who is going to lead us. We all participate in the process of choosing leaders, and so we all have this kind of shared leadership responsibility, some more than others, but we all share in that responsibility to some degree. So are we nurturing the kinds of leaders that produce the kinds of results that are important to God? And are you doing it in your own midst now, thinking, I'm going to nurture a leader that in 30 years is going to be producing those kinds of results? Are we far enough thinking out there that this is where we're going? We want to have these kinds of leaders in our midst. So listen again to the text, this time in the authorized version. Hey you, leaders called to care for my people, the Lord declares, you're doomed. You are supposed to be shepherds watching over the sheep, taking care of their needs, making sure that they are in good pastures. Instead, you're butchering my sheep for dinner and scattering the flock, chasing them out into the open where they're in danger of attack. You crooks need to know that I'm going to execute justice. You'll pay for what you've done to them, and I will directly take over the flock myself gathering the few surviving exiles from all of the places that I have had to send them. And I will bring them back to their home pasture. And there they will fulfill the mission I gave them in Genesis 1. They will be fruitful and multiply. They will thrive. And I promise that I will appoint new shepherds to oversee and care for them. Under the oversight of these real leaders, my people will come back together and will live without fear. Indeed, someday I will appoint a righteous leader, or righteous ruler, a new shoot from the tree of King David, which was cut down to a stump. But at that time, a new sprig from the dead stump will appear. Unlike the current leaders, he will be a wise king whose reign will be characterized by justice for all the people of the land. Under his leadership, both Israel and Judah will be safe and secure, living in peace with each other and the world. This king will be known by the name, "The Lord gives us justice." Dr. Fred Geisser, who is the professor emeritus of Old Testament at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, unpacks this a little bit more. And he says, they have not strengthened, he's talking about the kings, they have not strengthened the weak, healed the sick, bound up the injured, brought back the strayed, or sought the lost. And he says, the list here is significant because, and he references back to Ezekiel as well, because it tells us quite clearly what the government is for in God's eyes, and it promises judgment to those leaders who fail. Now, I'm not sure about Fred's understanding of the government, that we should limit this passage to the role of government. Rather, this is the role of all who hold any kind of power, whether it is in government, or whether it's on the ball field, or whether it's in the classroom, or business, or clergy, or whether it's the media, or whether it's the entertainers, anyone that holds any kind of power or sway. This applies directly to you. Woe to the leaders who wield power. You are responsible to be honest, wise, and just shepherds. Now, in the ancient world, the shepherd metaphor was commonly applied to the leaders. Not just in the Jewish context, but also especially across the entirety of the Middle East. And it's a very powerful metaphor, isn't it? Think of the shepherd as the guy that is hired to watch over the family sheep. To make sure that they have water. What else does sheep need? They need pasture, and they need protection. And that's a pretty big responsibility, especially considering the how do we put it kindly, the small mental capacity of the typical sheep. But what if instead of watching out for them, the shepherd ignored the sheep while he played video games and drank beer, except when he was slaughtering one of the sheep for dinner? And that's what was going on with Judah. The kings had become indifferent to the needs of the people, that they lived in economic isolation from the challenges of the 99%. And on top of that, there are indicators that they were actually using their power to take advantage of the people that were supposed to be under their care. These days, one of the primary evaluation points that we use when we are examining ministers who are being credentialed or ordained is we ask the question, is this a safe person in whom we can entrust the lives of vulnerable people? Is this a safe person in whom we can entrust the lives of vulnerable people? The Jewish kings had become unsafe. They were using their power to manipulate and to coerce people. And they were doing it to their own advantage. So what are the qualities that we look for in people we're going to trust to lead us? And certainly in ourselves as we each have our own realms of leadership responsibility. What do real leaders look like? So from our text this week, I'm pulling out, gleaning 6 things to look for as you choose leaders and as you seek to lead in your own realm. And the first one is this. Real leaders look out for the needs of others. Real leaders look out for the needs of others. In verse 1, you were supposed to be shepherds watching over the sheep, taking care of their needs, making sure that they are in good pastures. Verse 4, and I promise that I will appoint new shepherds to oversee and care for them. Leadership is always about the needs of others. Serving. If you want to be great in God's kingdom, learn to be the servant of all. That's right. That means that sometimes you have to put your own agenda, as good as it is, on the back burner. A simple example. This afternoon, I am going to help with the installation of Pastor Simon at the South Sudan Covenant Church. And my agenda in life is to keep things simple and relaxed. Right? I mean, but they want it to be a formal event. So in order to lead in that context, I'm going to have to set my own simple and relaxed agenda aside, which means that I have to wear shoes. They made it very clear to me that they wanted me to wear shoes. And then they said something about a suit and a clerical collar.
Do you have one?
He has them. Yeah.
I've got a couple.
For
just such occasions. Yes. Good leadership is always going to be other-focused. It's not that you ignore your own needs, quite to the contrary, but that you take good care of yourself so that you are better prepared to care well for others. Leadership is about creating an environment where others can thrive. Number 2, real leaders unite people. Real leaders unite people. Verse 4, under the oversight of these real leaders, my people will come back together and live without fear. I have many accomplishments under my pastoral belt. I've preached to thousands of people. I've constructed multi-million-dollar church buildings. I've held important denominational posts. But frankly, none of that stuff really floats my boat as much as seeing other people come together and in a context like this. This is way more exciting than all of those things. And maybe that's why I've spent so much time as a church planter. I really want to help create church homes for people in a way that counts. I want to create communities where people meet Jesus, and I want to bring people together. That's just what leadership is about. It's about pulling people together in a world that wants to pull them apart. You see, when we're together, we are at peace and living without fear. When we are together on the same page. Think about it in your own realm. How can you pull people together? How do you pull people together? Do you suggest that 2 or 3 people join you for coffee at Starbucks? You're gathering people when you do that. Or when you start a lunchtime Bible discussion meetup, you're pulling people together. When you introduce 2 neighbors to each other, people on the street who haven't known each other, they've each lived there for 15 years and they haven't met each other, and you introduce them to each other, that's pulling people together. That's uniting. That's an important aspect of leadership. And the exciting thing is that you don't really know where any of that might lead, where those connections are going to go. That's fun. But that's how leadership rolls. Number 3, real leaders are righteous, honest, kind of together. Indeed, verse 4, indeed, someday I will appoint a righteous ruler. Or as the the contemporary English version renders verse 5, someday I will appoint an honest king. When it comes to the kind of leadership that lines up with God's agenda, character matters. Always. It's not so much what you accomplish, but who you are that matters. And this is a really hard notion for Americans to embrace. We are so pragmatic about this kind of stuff. What's on your bucket list?
Skydiving.
Skydiving, okay. What's on your bucket list?
Travel the world.
Travel the world. What's on your bucket list?
Travel to Tierra del Fuego.
To where?
Tierra del Fuego.
Congo.
Congo.
Meet our kids.
To meet the Kevin kid, yeah. I can tell you that I've got a long bucket list of things that I'd like to accomplish in my remaining days of life. But frankly, very few of those things on my bucket list have to do with character. Who I am. And that is totally backward, at least as God sees things. He's wanting to entrust his schemes to right, living, honest people. People who are straight shooters because they are rightly related to him through Christ Jesus. You see, apart from our connection with Christ, who is totally righteous, there is no way to be righteous. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Number 4. Real leaders are just. Real leaders are just. Verse 5, indeed, someday I will appoint a righteous ruler. God is saying, I know that this is your heart's desire. That you would have a king who is right with me and right with all of his people. A king who is just. Again, in the biblical languages, the word for righteous and just are the same. They're translated differently in different contexts, but they're really the same word. A righteous ruler is a just ruler. It is someone who treats others fairly and kindly. Again, I've mentioned this before. Justice from a biblical perspective is not exactly the same as we commonly use the word justice in our world. In our world, justice is served when the letter of the legal code has been applied. But in the biblical framework or understanding, justice is when you take the legal code, interpret the intention behind it, and then apply the spirit of that interpretation. It's a whole lot more fluid than our understanding, and probably it would be closer to our idea of fairness. In our system, if you meet the letter of the law, you are right. You are right. If you can meet the criteria spelled out in that code book, you are in the right. But in the biblical understanding, if you meet the spirit of the law, you are in the right. The rules themselves, the codes, that are just set there as kind of guideposts to help you see the heart of God along the way, to help you catch the spirit of what God is saying. In this way, a person might meet the letter of the law, but still not be just. Does that make sense? Then we're talking about the kind of just that as God sees it. Number 5, real leaders are wise. Real leaders are wise. In order for a leader to act justly, he or she needs to have wisdom. Life is way too messy to be able to rely on some law code to specifically spell out every single possibility of something that could happen. You need to have someone who is wise enough to see the underlying issues and who is wise enough to apply God's standard in a way that contributes to the fairness in the messy situation. Indeed, verse 5, someday I will appoint a righteous ruler, a new shoot from the tree of King David, which was cut down to a stump. But at that time, a new sprig from the dead stump will appear. Unlike the current leaders, he will be a wise king. People who lead without wisdom end up creating more problems for themselves and others than they solve. Wisdom is a gift from God, often delivered through experience, success, and failure, which enables us to properly apply the law in a just and a fair way. And this is why wisdom is more common among, but not exclusive to, the elderly. They've been in more rodeos. The fact is that we don't emphasize the value of wisdom when we choose our leaders or seek to become leaders ourselves. When we're talking about leadership in our culture, we are looking for people who are practical. We're looking for people who are energetic, who are go-getters, people who are bold and willing to take risks, people who are Washington outsiders. But when have you ever seen an election commercial, and you've seen a few of those recently, emphasizing how wise a candidate is? When was the last time that you saw a school board election placard saying, "Vote for Mindy Stewart, she'll bring wisdom to the oversight of our schools"? No, wisdom is often overlooked and undervalued. But as God sees things, wisdom is essential, perhaps even a deal killer. A potential leader might bring an extensive resume and passion and success and vision to the task, but without wisdom, that person is not qualified to lead. So when Jeremiah is offering a message of hope to this floundering flock, he is saying that in the future, God is going to raise up a wise shepherd, a wise king, a wise leader for you. That leads us into number 6. Real leaders have a real leader. Real leaders have a real leader. And the point is that none of us lead perfectly. We are not perfectly wise to figure out the just thing to do. You're going to mess it up. None of us are impeccably righteous. All have sinned and fall short of God's glory. The only way that it's going to happen is if we allow the perfect leader, the perfect shepherd, and king sent by God himself to define the course of action and to live out his leadership through us, and that leader is Christ himself. Verses 5 to 6. Indeed, someday I will appoint a righteous ruler, a new shoot from the tree of King David, which was cut down to a stump. But at that time, a new sprig from the dead stump will appear, and unlike the current leaders, he will be a wise king whose reign will be characterized by justice for all the people of the land. And under his leadership, both Israel and Judah will be safe and secure, living in peace with each other and the world. This king will be known by the name, "The Lord gives us justice." Now, Jeremiah didn't, in his magic looking ahead glasses, didn't really see Jesus. But that's who he was talking about. He is the perfectly honest, righteous leader carrying justice to such an extreme that he himself ends up absorbing the blow of the world's injustices in his own death. And then he comes out on top. He is the leader over all leaders, the king over all kings, the shepherd over all shepherds. And as we draw on our relationship with Him, we are empowered to lead as He leads. His leadership skills are transferred to us through association. His model becomes our model. So as we understand it, leadership then is all about Jesus. Do as Jesus does when trying to navigate through the crazy era in which we live. Christ is our real hope for the future and the model of leadership for the present. Christ the King is the model leader, the honest, wise, righteous, and just shepherd, which is the key point this morning. Christ the King is the model leader, the honest, wise, righteous, and just shepherd, and that is the good news. So, who would like to share a word about how Jesus has been leading in your life, or maybe you have a question or a comment about the passage itself? I don't need to be the only voice with this thing. Who's got something to say?
Do you know what the Hebrew word or words are for the Lord gives us justice? What the name is when it says the King will be known by the name? Is it something we would recognize or not?
It is not something you would recognize, but it's when that phrase is also a play on words, which, let me see here. Scroll back to my notes. The king at that time was Zedekiah, and his name in Hebrew means the Lord is just, or the Lord is righteous. However, Zedekiah was not at all a just or righteous king. He was a screw-up. And the king, though, that God will send, a descendant of David, will be named the Lord gives justice. There's a little bit of play on the words there with the name Zedekiah. And the early readers would have picked up on that because they knew what everybody's name meant, and that was, they knew the context. They knew that Jeremiah was actually poking at Zedekiah at this point. So. Other ideas or comments, questions?
I think the new leader in the world is not about who appoint you to be a leader. It's about when you walk and the people automatically follow your idea, follow the pattern of walking and yes. But if you are appointed by Christ. Yes, the people automatically follow you because they can see you how you walk. They can see you how to be, and you like it them to work together. So it's not the mean about the boss point you become a manager or what supervisor is not the point.
Yeah,
the point is you are the only one very tiny more roles in the workplace, but your co-worker or your colleague automatically follow you and listen to your idea, and this is the real leader.
Right, this is the real leader. And so, for most of us, we are not the managers.
Yes.
And yet, that doesn't mean you don't lead. Even if you don't have a title, which can be pretty much meaningless in some contexts, then you can still lead.
Yeah, because
and you can lead according to what Christ is calling us to do. And actually, I've found that I'm able to exercise more leadership when I don't have a title, when I don't have a position or an office. And that's because I don't have to fill out as much paperwork. There's not as much administrative side to it, and that I'm able to just do my thing.
You're able to ask any people to do the job, and they automatically say, oh, I thought, okay, it's okay. They automatically Anybody come to you to ask you how to do this one, how to do that one, but not the marriage eventually.
Yeah, but the task or the goal then is to move from being just a consultant on how to best do that job to being the wise person in the context. How can you be the voice of wisdom, even if you don't have any kind of title that says
even
that
if you
you're
don't
the
have the
wise
title,
person?
you don't have the power, but the power, the power is not from the world.
Right.
It's from Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
And the people, they can see who is the real leader.